Hot and cold practice areas, and this is one area that's very consistent in the survey. So the fourth year in a row, the top three practices identified by the survey's respondents as being growth opportunities. It's IP, it's commercial litigation, and it's employment. And then it's followed by insurance litigation, real estate, M&A, and white collar. What's interesting about that is also a lot of people then look at labor and employment as an area that's going down. That's always one that I find interesting. And the same thing with white collar. And given my interest in public corruption and investigations, it seems like there's no shortage of those, so I would assume white collar is going to do fine. In terms of areas that are going to go down, people are anticipating bankruptcy, public finance, labor, white collar, and trust and estates. They were identified as areas that we're probably going to see a decrease in the coming year. There was a little bit of overlap from 2013. I didn't put 2013's practice areas on, but it was a little bit different. Generally, that's been consistent year over year. It was a little bit of a difference this year. So what does the future hold? So despite the fact that revenue was down year over year for a lot of, despite the fact that a lot of far fewer people were citing revenue growth in this survey, most were fairly optimistic about the coming year, which is, again, I think an encouraging sign, because I think we're done. Remember, this is an anonymous survey. They're not going to get pegged to it, so people can be honest about it. So, and I think we found in recent years that people who are pretty honest with this survey. So the fact that even though 2013 was a bit of a rough year compared to 2012, people are optimistic about the future. Most, 85.7%, said they expected to grow in the coming year. And then 10.7% said they were going to grow more than 10%. And 75% said less than 10%. In 2013, only 6.5% said they expected to grow significantly. So that's, when you talk about growing significantly, I mean, to me, that's a sizable jump. That's a sizable jump. And as I said before, those results are much more optimistic than when we see it on the national surveys. The national surveys, again, 2014 compared to 2013, they're more upbeat, they're more optimistic. Having said that, the PA survey still, the folks in this survey are more optimistic than what you're seeing generally on the national level. Another upbeat finding is that nobody expects to shrink. That's better than both 2013 and 2012's findings. In 2013, 6.5% said they expected to shrink significantly. And overall, 19.4% expected to shrink. And in 2012, it was 6.3%. Layoffs. 17.9% said they laid off staff, up from 16.7% in 2013. In 2012, 21.9%. 14.8% said they expect to lay off staff in the coming year. And that's up from 13.3% in 2013 and 9.4% in 2012. Again, another interesting thing to note, not only did more people lay off staff, but the percentage that think they expect to do it in the coming year has increased, which would I'll be interested to watch for next year, but I would expect that we're going to see more layoffs we will see more layoffs and more people saying they lay off people in the coming year than we did this year. 7.1% said they laid off attorneys in the past year, up from 3.2% in 2013. And then 7.1% said they expected to lay off attorneys in the coming year, and that's down, though, from the previous year of 16.1%. Again, I find that a little bit of a blip in terms of just making me think, it seems a little inconsistent with some of the other data that we have on the survey. Nobody has suggested to me otherwise that layoffs and headcount reduction won't continue to be on the table. As I've talked to a lot of managing partners, they tell me that, look, it's a grinded out. I've asked, so is it still a grinded out kind of economy? And they're like, yeah. And they've told me, look, I don't expect it to change anytime soon. They just said that's the way it is. We're going to have to grind it out. We're going to have to make constant assessments of staffing, of attorney levels, and do something. Interesting enough, though, the one thing that we've heard anecdotally, both in PA and now that I'm responsible for New Jersey, I've heard it in New Jersey, is that there's a little bit of gaps in talent at some of the firms, and particularly on, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gina, like on the transactional side. Because of all the heavy bleeding after the great when the Great Recession hit, and especially when a lot of transactional and real estate practices really tanked, and so a lot of the big firms shed a lot of people. The one interesting thing is that I'm hearing that there's a need for a certain level associate at some of these firms, particularly with transactional practices. And that's just something else to keep in mind and watch and see how that plays out. But it's interesting because now that I'm in other jurisdictions, I'm kind of getting a better feel for just in general what's Pennsylvania centric and what's more maybe indicative of a regional or, a more regional or national trend. And that's one thing that, I kicked the idea, we heard that in Pennsylvania, and then I kicked it around in New Jersey, and we've heard the same consistent drumbeat. So something to keep in mind. In closing, my takeaway from looking at all this is that 2013 was rough. 2014, based on what I'm hearing, is generally considered, I suspect the numbers are going to be a little bit better. I do think we're going to see more stratification. I do think there's going to be more client pressure. I do think there's going to be more pressure on firms to compete with similar size firms. People keep talking about the competition for talent because let's face it. Now it's interesting, I don't think we've had a very active lateral market at all this past year at all. And as we've seen ever since the Great Recession, the one-off laterals have pretty much died down. We've seen people more go after, practice groups or go after, small firms and try to acquire them. I think it's going to be competitive. I think it's reasonably optimistic. I do think that PA firms are still well run and in a fairly stable position. If you look at the national trends, though, you could make the argument that they're at slight risk to fall behind. I do. I think from a business standpoint, my takeaway from everything is that the relationship you have with your clients has never been more important than now. Because I think even though they're not wholesale switching, so the feedback I've gotten from some folks is that even though it's a buyer's market, but GCs haven't turned into Walmart. They're not being so aggressive with driving down price and being so ruthless about who they're where they're moving the work. But it could happen. Having said that, they've acknowledged to me, the ones I've talked to, they're willing to move. They're willing to move. So if they're willing to move, that's an opportunity and a risk. So to whatever extent the firms, and this is where you guys tie into, whatever extent you can help strengthen this relationship, shore up your weak spots, I think you're going to put yourselves in a really good position.